Have you ever felt like information that you learn quickly disappears? One moment you're studying frantically for that next exam. You do end up writing it. You feel fairly confident, but then you forget every single thing a week later. Why is that a problem? Well, you still need to write your final exam, and that content will be examinable. How am I going to remember all that information in the first semester on top of the new information that they're learning? Well, today you're in luck. I'm going to tell you exactly how you can go about learning within an environment, learning a new skill so that you can embed that knowledge, understand it, and memorize it forever so that you can recall in it to do well in your exams. Hi, my name is Kandim Shungane. I'm a chartered accountant and learning strategist. So, in today's video, we will be talking about the importance of having a skill mindset when you're learning as opposed to just simply studying for the sake of passing exams. We'll highlight how exactly can you go about learning new skills for the long term. Secondly, we'll then cover the importance of context and how exactly you get that context. Then we'll cover the importance of being able to do cross-sectional learning and to be able to identify how what you're learning relates to what you've learned before. Then from there, we'll talk about the importance of pace when you're learning and how many students get it wrong when it comes to this. And lastly, we'll talk about those hacks, those simple tricks that you can then use in order to elevate your study game and make sure that you remember information for a very long time. So let's go straight into it. The first important thing when you want to learn information for the long term, for long term memory, to do well and excel in exams and embed that skill, is that you need to understand how learning works. And essentially, learning works via context. Now, why is context important in the learning process? Well, think about when you were growing up as a small child. You probably started to crawl and you fell and people encouraged you. Your parents may have said, "Come, Johnny, wake up, stand up." But ultimately, at the end of the day, you fell. But after some time, your brain learned that the previous time we fell because we did this motion. Now, why don't we change this motion to another so that we can make sure we don't fall next time? And that's how the brain works. It understands based on your mistakes, the things that you've done before, and it's through that context that it's able to create those pathways so that when the next time you have to do something, you're better prepared and you can ultimately execute on the task. Now, that might be an example in your formative years, but it remains relevant as well as you study. Right? What I found when I was still studying is that when often I could draw parallels to the new information, to something I'd learned before or some type of material that I'd seen, I found that learning was much easier compared to when something had no context. I didn't understand where it fit in and I couldn't relate that information. So therefore, I realized that if I wanted to do well at school, I needed to understand and have the proper context, because once I had that context, I was able to relay that information that's new to prior information that I had, and I saw my studying accelerate. I started learning quicker. I started being able to embed knowledge for longer periods of time, and ultimately my marks improved and I did well. But then the next question becomes, Kandi, that's all well and good to talk about context, but how exactly do you get this context? Right. So there are three approaches that we'll talk about that can help you identify and develop this context. The first thing that is important is that context comes primarily from your lectures and from your interactions for the first time through pre-reading. Many students miss this important crucial steps. Why? Because when we go to classes, we want to go tick a register. When we so-called pre-read, we seldom do that because we think, why should I do that? I don't have time. But actually, when you pre-read, for example, you're absorbing that information for the first time. And naturally, as you read that information and it confuses you, you'll be asked, what is this? Why do I need to know this? Where do I apply it? Those important questions will create question marks within your learning process. And ultimately, your job will then to go to the class or to the material and fill in the blanks. And that's exactly how we learn. It's when we fill in those blanks that we're at our most potent. And how I like to say is that learning is all about expectations versus actual outcome. I found that you learn best when you develop an expectation. So expectations start forming when you pre-read, and then when you then discover what you don't know and what you thought you knew, and you compare these things. That's when the learning actually takes place. So pre-reading is key. It helps you focus in class. So I get a question often, even in the comment section in my videos, as to, well, when do I pre-read? Don't overthink it. My advice around pre-reading: you can do this before you sleep, an hour before. Try to find periods of during the day when you are less productive. I recommend when you are less productive, because you ultimately don't want pre-reading to get into the way of the actual real learning that you have to do. So in between lunch breaks, walking, whether you are in a bus, walking back home or driving back home, find those pockets of time, no more than 30 minutes, I would say, per subject. Ideally, even 15 minutes per subject. That means you're working towards maybe an hour if you're a CA student with 4 subjects, no more than an hour tackling pre reading for all your modules. The next thing is that actually attending classes also helps you develop that expectation and that context. When you attend classes, again, the lecturers are paving the way for you. They're telling you where exactly the problem, the solution, and how this content is actually positioned to be the solution to that problem that it's trying to solve. So lecturers typically are experienced because they would have seen these principles in practice, and they would have learned it before, and they would have done it over and over again. So ensure that you leverage off their knowledge, ask the right questions, pay attention in class, so that that information that you then absorb, you can then help to develop the necessary context, so that when you go and read the textbook for the first time, it doesn't seem abstract. The lecturer is taking you through, and then you quickly working through that. And that, I found that very effective. And we've covered that in prior videos. We're saying it again because it's critically important, and it's something that you definitely need to do. The next thing that is quite powerful, and I must admit, I never did it when I was a student, but throughout my time mentoring students in the different programs and through my channel, and then just giving general advice, I've noticed something that's powerful, and that is try to find context from people and things around you. That's important. So, what do I mean by this? Sometimes context is all about understanding why exactly this information is important for you. Ever wondered why, for example, when we watch movies, we tend to remember that information far easier? Because you probably watched the trailer and you kind of built up an expectation of some sort of what that movie will look like, or there's some type of anticipation, curiosity that is natural within you, and you want to find out. And naturally, you focused, and you don't actually have to work hard. You can remember the scene, what the protagonist did, what the villain did, and you're able to paint this picture. What if we could create or recreate that environment within a learning space? We actually can. And what I found is an effective tool is that before you actually pick up a book, before you even pre-read or do anything, look at what you're supposed to learn for that week. Maybe they say it's mergers and acquisitions and finance. Maybe in tax they say you're studying inventory, or what we call stock taxation, or maybe they say in auditing you're doing internal controls. Whatever you're doing, before you actually pick up a book, actually understand, what does this topic mean in real life? What is it trying to solve? And a nice way to do this is just quickly go to YouTube. Go to YouTube, put in the name of the video. For example, mergers and acquisition. Why do businesses do these? And simply by doing that on YouTube, you can get a video and you can instantly get an idea of why is this important within a business context. Similarly, now we've got AI. such a powerful tool that wasn't there when I was studying, but is certainly there when you are studying at the moment. Tap and put it in ChatGPT. You can literally put inside, please explain to me what this topic is all about simplistically, and what real life problem is it trying to address. And behold, ChatGPT will give you the answer, give you the context that you need in order to be able to embed that knowledge. Another important tool that you can use to be able to get that natural curiosity, that natural context to be able to do well, is maybe simply ask mentors and people who have passed that module before. You will find that people who have passed that module, particularly those who are already in practice, are doing this thing in real life, will be able to give you a greater appreciation of why this is important. That's why I advocate for having mentors. Have mentors, particularly those who are in the positions where you want to see yourself in one day. So if you want to be a chartered accountant, find mentors who are chartered accountants. If you want to be an engineer, find mentors who are engineers. This will generally help you in your studies so that you can get that context again from the horse's mouth, from people who are dealing with these issues on an everyday basis. And why that is important is that that natural curiosity will then drive you to firstly have the right type of attitude when you learn, which is key, so that that hour that you learn, you make the most out of it. You're going to be naturally motivated. When you're motivated and curious, you then are able to create these pathways that are conducive for long-term memory retention. And ultimately, all of this will result in you um, learning more efficiently and getting better results. The next step that you can use in order to also be able to create this context to learn information easier and to embed it in the long term is learn cross functionally. Um, Again, such a powerful tool that I tended to pick up later on in my studies when I was transitioning now into fourth year. I started picking up there were similarities in the subjects. And it is in those similarities that I really started to leverage and boost up my learning. I noticed that, for example, if I was wanting to answer a question around decision making, management accounting used to be the correct subject to do this. And then I noticed that if the decision making was in the short term, topics like relevant costing that used to help me understand what are the incremental cash flows from making this decision in the short term. And then I equally understood that if I wanted to make the same decision, but in a long term horizon, i.e., for longer than 1 year, then capital budgeting was the right tool to use in order to be able to answer that question. Same principle, incremental cash flows, but now because it's in the long term, there are slight nuances to relevant costing, such as the fact that I have to incorporate discounting because cash flows in different periods have different certainties and therefore are not the same, and therefore I need to be able to bring them back to one period to aggregate them appropriately. That's where discounting comes in. And equally, the fact that I now have to make decisions in the long term introduce new variables that are not necessarily there in the short term. For example, fixed costs now have to be incorporated in my cash flow because fixed costs will change in the long term. Incorporating taxation, because when something is going to be operating for more than a year, it may have consequential tax impacts that will influence the decision, and things like recoupments and whether or not I'll have to sell that asset or or equipment at the end of the period. All these become nuances. But look at it. I was able to marry the two concepts, relevant costing, capital budgeting. These are quite similar. And then it was in the nuances where I'm able to differentiate between the two and say they're the same, but they are slightly more additional factors that I must now consider when I'm doing it in the long term as part of capital budgeting. And that's what we mean by cross-functional learning. You have to be appreciative of how does this information that I'm learning relate to something that I've learned before. When you start forming these questions internally and asking the question, well, You're telling me this. How is this different to what you told me last time? How is this different to what this other lecturer said in this other subject? How is this similar? When you start drawing those parallels between what you've learned before and that context that you've already developed, that further creates the neuropathic pathways within your brain that are able to be enforced, and so that you can be able to learn that information again easier, so that it can stay in your brain for longer periods of time. So ask those questions. How does this relate to what I know? Where have I seen this before? How is it different? How can I apply it? And what are the nuances? These are all important questions to draw the distinctions. Hi guys, I just want to do a segue in the middle of this video. If you are a student at UNISA and you, or in general, working and studying at the same time, please listen out carefully. I've started a beta program which helps specifically UNISA students at a third year level be able to navigate the complexities of course. Here we provide technical videos, assistance, mentorship, coaching, as well as tips and tricks to do well, extra exam prep, marking of scripts, access to on-demand videos, you name it, tools that will help you to do well. We're trialing this with these specific students, and hopefully, if it's successful, we can then be able to offer it to everyone else. If this is something that you're interested in, please um, comment on the chat function so that we can reach out to you. There'll also be a link on the description for you to be able to engage with this. Thank you, and back to the video. The next important tool that we'll talk about is the importance of developing habits and not being fixated with passing exams. Many students make this common mistakes of saying, I want to pass my exam and therefore I'm going to do whatever it takes to do that. They'll end up cross-nighting, learning materials, page after page after page after page, skipping classes so that they can be able to do and perform optimally in that exam. The problem with that is twofold. The first is, first of all, you're not guaranteed to do well in that exam with that approach. Most examiners, particularly in your higher order subjects like accounting, engineering, and most subjects, to be frank, in university, they require you to apply and solve real life problems. Simply understanding the theory is insufficient to be able to demonstrate that ability to problem solve, and often will find you wanting. The second and arguably the most important reason why that approach further does not work is that often those students are unable to embed that information in the long term. And this has probably happened to you as well, where you've studied and you've crossed night and you've really done well in terms of trying to be prepared, but ultimately a week later you forget everything that you've studied. The problem with that is that that information will still be required at the end of the year when you write the final exam. The fact that you have not embedded that knowledge within your long-term memory is a problem, because at the end of the year you have to learn all of this information within a short period of time. It simply isn't possible for you to be able to do this. So how can you change this? How can you ensure that you don't fall into this trap that many students fall into? Treat your studying as part of your journey to acquire a skill rather than it being a means to which you have to do in order to pass. This is a game changer. When I started adopting this approach to say, I'm not learning to pass, but rather I'm learning to acquire a skill to be a chartered accountant one day, everything changed for me. Because when you are acquiring a skill, you then need to follow a defined process. The learning cycle, to be more specific. When I want to learn a skill, it's firstly getting that context, which comes from attending classes, and then ultimately doing the post reading so that you can be able to juxtapose what the lecturer said and what you think the material is, developing that expectation. And importantly, this is where a lot of students get it wrong. Once you've developed that expectation from pre-reading, attending classes, and then doing your own material or notes, you're then in a position to then practice. The practice is important because here you're saying, this is what I think the answer is from what I've developed from my studying. Then you have to compare that to what the actual answer is. And the differential between the two may be the same, meaning your expectation of what it should have been is equal to what it actually is in the memorandum. This then builds your confidence. And if you do it consistently, that confidence can then lead to you embedding that information for longer periods of time. Because what are you doing? It's spaced repetition. Again, we've covered it in previous videos. What is spaced repetition? What is the secret study strategy? You can check it out. But it's just being able to see the information and be able to engage with it regularly that's going to help you then be able to remember that information for a longer period of time. The second reason why practicing is so important is that when your expectation is different to what the actual outcome should have been, then you're in a position where you have to question, why did I get this wrong? And it is that questioning where deep learning actually takes place. Because now you have to go back to your material. Did I miss a concept that I thought I knew? Or perhaps you have to engage a lecturer in that I thought this was the principle, but what is it actually? What am I missing here? In some instances, it could be a silly mistake that you've made in that specific question that is unique to it, and then you jot it down in your logbook so that you don't make that mistake again. All of these are powerful tools to help you embed knowledge. And it is when you embed that knowledge that it becomes a skill and a habit. The more you do, go to post reading, do your notes, practice questions under exam conditions, ask when you get something wrong, rinse and repeat this process. It then becomes habitual. And it is that development of that habit that makes it easier for your brain to be able to compartment, to be able to put it in a compartment where it transfers it from your short-term memory to your long-term memory. And that's actually what we want to see. We want that information to make that successful transfer to long-term memory, your cortex, so that you can be able to remember that information for a very long time. The fourth thing that I want to talk about is that when you're learning, take things slow. So when you take things slow, it allows you to be able to refine information better. There is no such thing as learning to write for exams and learning quickly and frantically. That's simply not how you develop skills or long term memory retention. But rather, you want to take things slow, because when you take things slow and you're under a less pressurized environment, you're able to question things better. And it is in that questioning, understanding why the principle looks like this, where do I apply it, and how does it fit into the bigger picture, that's when the real learning happens. And I found that by sticking to a system where every week you try to be up to date, post reading, doing questions, tutorials under a less pressurized environment, you are then able to be conducive in memory retention for the long term. However, if you try to do it frantically, you'll forget information. So, in summary, keep learning, but do so in a self paced, slow manner so that that information can be refined properly and you can remember it for the long term. The last thing is that don't forget the other learning strategies we've talked about. On this channel, we've talked about the importance of following the recommended study approach, which again, you can check it out. We've also talked about the importance of leveraging tools like YouTube, tutors, mentors, lecturers who are all there to assist you in order to be able to understand information much more easier. The importance now is that now you also have tools like AI that we've talked about. Use all these tools to supplement your learning. The more resources you are able to pull together to make learning easier for yourself, the better for you, so that you can excel in your exams. Okay, guys, thank you so much. This brings us to the end of the video. Hopefully, this was helpful. Please make sure to like, comment. Let's chat. Was this video helpful? Are there any other tools that you use in order to be successful? What other videos would you want me to do in the future? All of these are important things. Thanks to those who keep on liking and sharing. And I hope to see you soon. Until we meet again, remember, it's all about the right strategy. It's not about how hard you work, but how smart you do so with the right strategy. Thank you and see you again.